Looking to buy rental property can be a long process, more so if you're doing it on your own. You often hear of stories of people buying the wrong property where the rent is barely rising, lose tenants, or sometimes even cost them a lot of money, maintenance, upgrades, and possible remedial processes. You don't want to be in that situation. So what I've done, I've identified several things you should look at, to ensure you are getting the best value rental property you can find. Doing this ensures you improve your chances. Not going through these steps or not looking at these items could cost you a lot of money to track and get a low return on your investment. These are the items. When you've got two properties getting similar returns, we look at several items. The size of the land. I think this is very important. The bigger the land, more it'll be worth than the track. Generally. Not always, but generally. Land is a resource, and it's a limited amount of land. So things changes, opportunity might come where you can maybe be able to do more with existing land. So generally, more land is better. Longer leases can also be better than shorter leases, depending what you want to do. If you want a stable investment, you've got a good quality building, and there's no short-term redevelopment possibilities, length of the lease is better. So longer lease is better in that situation. On the other hand, a shorter lease would be better if it is a development site, or you want to redevelop the building or refurbish the building in a tract. Rental market value. Check how the rent is compared to other properties of similar size, shape, use, etc. in the area. Are the tenants paying a fair rent? Is it below market? Is it above market? Good things like, for example, you may have a situation where the owner may have a business from that premises. And what a lot of owners do, they're desperate to get out of the property and they want a certain price for their business. So they have to lower the rent to encourage people to rent it. So they get a higher return on selling the business and a lower return on investment long term. Reasonably common. I've seen examples of this a lot of time when I had a situation, someone who was selling a business in industrial property, a very successful business. They wanted to retire and they were after a certain price for the business. And in order to get that certain price, they'd negotiate a price or lower price for the rental for a reasonable amount of time because that person was buying that business. What happened? That person bought the business for a good price. At the same time, got a lower rental for a period of time. Now that rental, I'd estimate, was about half the market. The actual person who sold the business, owned the property, decided to sell the property separately and sold it on return because they knew that the going rate was 5 or 6%, and they got 5 or 6% return on their investment or their property, which appeared to be fairly competitive and corresponding to rental returns for similar type of industrial areas, which worked out about the same, similar return for a industrial building. So 5, 6%, whatever it was. What happened? That rent was half the market rate, roughly. The person owned the building was getting a very good deal. They knew that they could increase the rent substantially next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Consequently, they sold it for a considerable amount or more several years later because they knew that the rental was below market rent and it was worth paying the extra money for that lower rent. So look at the return, it was probably only showing 3, 4%. But when they increased the rent, it probably worked about 7, 8% return on investment. So look at that situation. Look at zoning and possible other uses down the track. I like to call it a utility property. Look at what's going on in the area. The demographics changing, the government pumping money into the area. What is going on? If you possibly have got several uses for that property, it's probably worth more money than if it's pretty much just an office building and nothing else can be done with it, or industrial, whatever it may be. Look at the condition of the property. Is it well maintained, fairly new? Does it require a lot of work to be done to improve it? Can you see any major maintenance problems down the track, or maybe even worse, structural problems. Does it have parking? May not always be an advantage or disadvantage, but generally, if it's got parking, it's probably worth more than it's got parking. Another thing is how much time does it require to manage the property? Is it high maintenance? Do you have to be on out there all the time? Has it got a lot of tenants there? Do you have to be continually looking at things, improve it? High maintenance tenants. The first thing people look at when investing first rental property is residential. Now, residential generally shows 2-3% net return. On the other hand, commercial usually starts at 4-5% return. So on the surface, commercial sounds like a better investment. But there are other things with residential. Now, most residential, there's nothing else you can do with it at the moment, basically, especially if you're buying an apartment as an apartment. On the other hand, houses, especially if they're well positioned in growing areas, there are other possibilities. For example, childcare centres, or retirement villages, or boarding house. So maybe it's worthwhile taking that lower return or lower rental income in the short term, knowing that there's a high possibility of converting it to some commercial use down the track. They can somehow also decide to increase the floor space ratio, which means you can have increased height limit, which happens in a lot of cities close to public transport, schools, and that sort of thing. So it could be a long-term investment. So the rental return may appear low, but could be good down the track because of the redevelopment potential. With commercial, look at the rental. As I mentioned before, is it market value or is it inflated? Now, two things might happen. Sometimes, which I've seen, rents can be inflated. Maybe the owner may have colluded with a tenant. We have an increased rental so that there'll be high return when they want to sell it, especially if it's a short lease. It's occasionally. And as I mentioned before, is it a low rental? If you look around the area, get someone to work with someone who knows the area, knows rentals, is fairly good at knowing what the current rentals are, what the values are in the area. Your commercial real estate coach or an experienced real estate agent. How does it compare? So it may look poor because it's only 3-4% return, but the rental is worth a lot more. And when the renewal is due, it'd be worth a lot more. So 3-4% return on your investment, you may be getting 6 or 7 or 8% return, depending what the rentals are. The thing is, does it comply? Example could be something like a boarding house. Now you may be comparing to rental returns, yield returns, boarding house, and one's getting a higher return because they've got more beds in there or have got rooms which not necessarily approved for accommodation being used. Does it comply with fire regulations? The government's strict on safety regulations, especially fire regulations. Some owners think they're very important. I can assure you, you may get away with it. If something happens, you're in big trouble. Is it worth the risk? Also, look out for flavour of the month investments. They used to be offices and retail. Industrial weren't very popular. Now, we had a thing called COVID. That changed things. People work from home. Office returns reduced. They were good beforehand. Now they're poor investments. Who knows? Maybe the office you're purchasing, low return now, may be in a position to improve rentals if things continue in the future. People decide to go back to their offices and the track. And there's a lot of offices being converted to other uses. Maybe there could be a shortage. This happened with hotels. There's times where hotels weren't doing very well. Many were converted to apartments. Consequently, there's a shortage. Example, the Sydney Olympic Games situation, there's a shortage of hotels, a bit more hotels. Then there was a surplus. Again, more conversions back to accommodation. Now, as things are COVID settled down, things are getting back to normal, people are travelling more, there was a requirement for more hotels. So returns on hotels is getting better and more hotels are being built. Another situation could be in industrial. They weren't very popular. Now they are popular. Now, what's happened. It could be the same thing, situation, what's happened with childcare centres. 10 years ago, 6-8% return. Industrial, recently, again, they saw returns as well too. Now they're becoming blue chip investments. More and more people are buying industrial property because it's popular. It's a shortage at the moment. And there's a shortage of land too. That could last a lot longer, but there's going to be increased demand for industrial properties. Consequently, the yields are getting smaller. Another thing with industrial property, I found also the existing tenant may be someone involved in the food industry. Now, there's always been a shortage of commercial kitchens and food manufacture type of industrial places because of high cost of fitting them out. Now, if that person decided to leave for whatever reason, close down or whatever, you would get a good return if you found a tenant who wanted to be in that same sort of business. And even in the food business, it could vary between a baker to a butcher, a commercial kitchen to a dry goods supplier, especially if that commercial property, or industrial property, hasn't got a make good clause. Now, if you haven't got a make good clause and it's fitted out for, say, being a butchery, and you want to put someone else in there, like a importer, exporter, you've got to pay for the renovations to demolish the existing structure and fit it out for the new tenant. So that way, I ask my clients to ensure there's a make good clause, which most leases have got, so that maybe you've got an option to ask the departing tenant to bring that premises back to the original conditions, which was an empty shell, so that new tenants can fit in there. Also, with commercial, you've got floor space ratio as well too. Can you increase the height limit? Maybe you convert it from an industrial to a mixed-use property, retail and accommodation. They're talking about allowing extra levels on industrial properties. That could be a possibility as well too. Other things to look for is possible contamination to report. Now, is contamination a good thing? Not really. Is it a bad thing? In most cases it is. But as I keep saying, every problem has been sorted out. It's not the only property in the planet has got the contamination problem. A good example is petrol stations. I recall years ago we had a petrol station and it was probably worth about $1.2 million, for example, and people weren't prepared to pay more than $800,000 for it. Thing is, that property would have cost about $100,000 to rectify if it was contaminated. And also that property had allowed for more development. So another level we put on top. What happened? Some bought it for that lower price, had another floor. To my knowledge, there was contamination on there, or no need to do it to rectify it under existing use. It was still a petrol station, and that person got a very good investment, good return. So there are many things to look at when looking and comparing rental properties. Go through these items, other items. Get someone to work with you to ensure that you don't make mistakes, end up with a big lemon. This is Tastzidis, CC Properties. Please subscribe to this channel. I'd like to hear comments. Have you bought a good rental property? How did you select it? Any questions of rental properties? Have you had any problems? I'd like to hear.